Hello, hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. We will be getting started in just a moment. Welcome, everyone, on this wonderful evening. We're so glad to have you join us tonight. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what we have going on for you. As you get settled in, first I'll say thank you to both Courtney and Onnesha for joining us. This is such an exciting book to discuss. And I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. In case you're new here, we are Lost City Books, an independent bookstore in the heart of Adams Morgan, specializing in used, new, and rare books. Our new space, as you can see in the video here, generates engagement and enrichment from the surrounding community, inviting artists, activists, organizers, authors, of course, and educators, many of which are reflected in our staff from the area to share their knowledge and skills. I am your opening host tonight, and we're also joined by the wonderful Adam, who is the owner of our store. Next, I'll tell you a little bit about Courtney Zoffness, the author of Spilt Milk, who we're all here to discuss today. Courtney Zoffness writes fiction and nonfiction. Tonight, we're discussing a nonfiction work. She won the Sunday Times Short Story Award, an Emerging Writer Fellowship from the Center for Fiction, the Creative Nonfiction Prize from Arts and Letters, and residency fellowships from MacDowell. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, the New York Times, Guernica, the Southern Review, Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere, and was listed as notable in Best American Essays in 2018 and 2019. Her debut, Spilt Milk, Memoirs, which we're here to discuss tonight, from McSweeney's, was named a most anticipated book of 2021, and you're about to find out why, by Publishers Weekly, LitHub, The Millions, Refinery 29, Books Are Magic, and Paperbook Paris, and has received several starred reviews. Courtney directs the creative writing program at Drew University and lives with her family in Brooklyn, New York. Our other guest for the night is Onnesha Roychoudhuri. Onnesha is an author and educator with over 15 years of experience working at the intersection of storytelling and social justice. She's the author of The Marginalized Majority, Claiming Our Power in a Post-Truth America, named one of the best books of 2018 by Kirkus Reviews. Onnesha regularly leads writing and storytelling workshops for organizations and universities across the country, including the Moth, as well as Rutgers University, Hunter College, and Western Connecticut State University, where she's an instructor in the graduate writing program. A former fellow at the Center for Fiction, Onnesha's writing has appeared in publications such as Rolling Stone, Kenyon Review, N+1, Virginia Quarterly Review, the Boston Review, McSweeney's, The Rumpus, The Nation, The American Prospect, Salon, and Mother Jones. She's a 2011 and 2012 Pushcart Prize nominee and has been awarded residencies at Hedgebrook and Blue Mountain Center. Lastly, just a little bit about Spilt Milk, the book that we're here to discuss tonight. This is the excellently written blurb that you can find if you look more into the book as well. What role does a mother play in raising thoughtful, generous children? In her literary debut, internationally award-winning writer Courtney Zoffness considers what we inherit from generations past, biologically, culturally, spiritually, and what we pass on to our children. Spilt Milk is an intimate, bracing, and beautiful exploration of vulnerability and culpability. Zoffness relives her childhood anxiety disorder as she witnesses it manifest in her firstborn, endures brazen sexual advances by a student in her class, grapples with the implications of her young son's cop obsession, and challenges her Jewish faith. Where is the line between privacy and secrecy? How do the stories we tell inform who we become? Oh, it sounds like we are in for a really rich experience for this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can introduce our speakers for the night. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. I only regret that we can't be in that beautiful space in person. It looks so lovely. And this is the first event where I've actually gotten to see a little bookstore tour. So that was such a sweet teaser. Thank you to Shady and Adam and Onnesha. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I'm really excited for this.
So Onnesha and I have known each other for a little while, and incidentally, we were co-fellows at the Center for Fiction, but both birthed books of nonfiction. And I suspect that part of our conversation tonight will include a little bit about how we utilize the skills we garnered as MFA students of fiction programs and all of our fiction chops to write books of nonfiction. But I think I'll start by giving a short reading from Spilt Milk. And this is, the book has been called a memoir in essays, which is, a subgenre of a genre. So I'll go with that. And this is a section called Hot for Teacher. I don't think it requires any warm-up, so I will just read a couple of pages. Hot for Teacher. What did they want more than anything? Violent things, unattainable things. More than anything, she wanted to taste blood, said one student. More than anything, he wanted freedom, said another. Your characters need to have desires, I'd explained in the previous class. Drama arises when people struggle to get what they want. Their first writing assignment of the semester at this public East Coast college. Compose a short fictional sketch that begins with wanting. Compelling, complex fiction, I'd said, grows out of desires great and small. Their opening sentences, offered proof. More than anything, she wanted a baby. More than anything, he wanted things to return to the way they were. Then we arrived at Charlie in the back row, a pale, acne-pocked sophomore who rarely participated in class discussions. I'd surmised he was shy, but it was early in the term. I was making assumptions. More than anything, Charlie read in an even voice, he wanted for her to realize that she shouldn't depend on the bankers or lawyers he imagined she dated, that it wasn't them who could really and truly satisfy her, but it was him, a student in her Tuesday writing class, who could and would push aside the pile of ungraded papers and take her passionately atop her desk, him with whom she belonged in a way that only the romantic poetry she taught them could convey. 20 pairs of eyes pinned me in place. I willed my face not to blush, my voice not to crack. Okay, I said, just as I had to the student who'd shared work before him. More than anything, I wanted to scream expletives in his face. Charlie's expression was inscrutable. He seemed neither proud nor nervous, perhaps a little expectant, like he'd just ordered takeout and was waiting to be told how much it cost. That passage, I said, has a nice rhythm to it, a nice cadence. I leaned back against the table, my rear precariously close to the pile of ungraded papers. I would not let him have his way with me. The repetition, I said, is poetic. The repetition, I wanted to say, keeps your voice loud while mine stays silent. I moved on to the student next to him, one whose character, more than anything, wanted a piece of pie. I'll read just a little more. Oh, yeah, okay. It is February in Brooklyn, and the cafe speakers try to counteract the cold. They blast Southern soul in the form of Joe Tex's I Gotcha, a song I know from the film Reservoir Dogs. I understand the story and its lyrics. It was mine one Friday night in high school when I left a friend's basement to use the upstairs bathroom. The second floor was dark, the house asleep, but I knew the way. When I emerged from the bathroom into the shadowy hallway, her older brother's friend was waiting for the toilet, I assumed. I recognized his football jersey and backward baseball cap, but not the thin-lipped smile he put inches from my face, or the pressure of his bony hands on my hips, or the way he moved his body from side to side with mine as I tried to dodge him, the entrapment dance. When I retreated backward, he stepped forward until my heel hit the tile at the entrance to the bathroom. He was going to push me in there, I realized. He was going to push me onto the cold floor and lock the door behind him, and everyone was in the basement and no one would hear me scream. I tasted iron in the back of my throat, a bloody nose, belted, "Let me through!" and somehow wriggled past. But we're not talking about a dance. We're talking about a song, a groovy, horn-filled tune whose lyrics describe how a man, more than anything, wants a woman against her will. Now kiss me. Hold it a long time, hold it. Don't turn it loose now, hold it. My first ever intimate encounter was an unwelcome kiss. I was 9. Todd had advertised his crush on me, told classmates I had a nice ass, crude language that made me giggle. Was I supposed to feel flattered? Stung? Todd would later try to retract the comment, slipping a sheet of yellow paper into the cave of my school desk, a letter I inexplicably saved. Quote, "I'm sorry for what I said. You do have a nice ass, but only in jeans." One afternoon in the park, Todd announced that he wanted a kiss. Your characters need to have desires. I didn't want to kiss him, nor did I want to be kissed, but the more I refused, the more he insisted until a chase ensued. "Just a kiss," he called. I sprinted and screamed, "No!" Everyone laughed and cheered him on, including my girlfriends. Terror bloomed in my blood. Drama arises when people struggle to get what they want. I wound up curled face down in the dirt, hands and arms blocking the sides of my face, heart hammering. What was I afraid of? I couldn't have told you then, but I can tell you now. I was afraid of how words we both understood, "leave me alone," suddenly had no effect, of how my body didn't belong to me alone. Todd found a sliver of exposed skin between my earlobe and neck and crushed his lips against it. I'll stop there.
I'm so glad that you read that from that essay, because I feel like it does such a great job of capturing what runs throughout this collection, which is both like a such extreme attention to getting the details right, like surgical precision, but also like there's comedy in there. Like it's dark, but it's so real. And I feel like just watching, I can see Adam's face, and I know there are moments where I'm very aware that like my face is visible, my reactions are visible, and there's these moments where I'm sort of laughing, but I'm also cringing. And I think this essay does such a good job of capturing this discomfort, and like a child telling, a fellow child they have a nice ass, which is like,
I didn't even
what
have
do you,
that. It was a touch.
Right, but it's like he's clearly repeating language that he heard somewhere else, but like just this sense, I feel like it does such a good job of capturing this sense of like, what's my line, that feeling of like, I don't know that I fully have the script here. But yeah, there's one line in particular that I just found myself reading over and over when I was reading through that essay, which is, Charlie's expression was inscrutable. He seemed neither proud nor nervous, perhaps a little expectant, like he'd just ordered takeout and was waiting to be told how much it cost. Which again, I feel like is like finding the exact right language to capture that expression, but also it's darkly funny. But I'm interested in that there's sort of like a standoff in expressionlessness there, right? Like as soon as he's looking at you expectantly, and then you feel like your task is to not give him a reaction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious about that theme generally of just sort of trying to hide the impact and like what's behind that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where else that idea lives, but in that moment, absolutely, that felt like seeding something, that if I were to do the thing that he wanted me to have done, though I still remain completely perplexed as to what it is he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
I don't know, just act like flustered, ashamed, embarrassed, what? I don't know what, which was part of the mystery this essay explores, I think. It's just the bravado and ego that would compel this, even if he didn't know what he wanted either.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think the power, like sort of the power off in that moment was me desperately like not giving him what I may have calculated he may have wanted. So it was just a very complicated kind of mental gymnastics to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and I think what's wild is like, even though that we get the sense of clarity that like in that moment you're like, don't give that reaction that you feel like maybe he wants, but also would be like, he wants something, right? But even after that, even though we get the sense that you understand on some level that this is clearly insanely inappropriate, you then go on to kind of question it, right? Like you then go on to be like, okay, maybe I need to be more objective here. Maybe right. I'm reading too much into this.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that sort of questioning that happens?
For sure. And I think that to me encapsulates so much of my experience as a woman. And I can't speak for other women, but I do feel like it feels like familiar terrain, as this, in other words, not unique to me, that like, was I dressed too provocatively? Like in what way did I misread or participate in this in some way? And I do feel like self-doubt is so much a part of my experience with bad behavior. It's sort of like, oh, Courtney, you're so uptight. Or like, oh, like the ways in which I would constantly question like what it was I had seen or felt or experienced, at the hands of men behaving badly or boys. And what should I have done? What had I done? Which, it's really troubling. That's even where the mind goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you and I are friends, so we've had a lot of conversations about this kind of behavior, navigating it, and both of us have written about it. And I mean, one of the insane things is I feel like, as much as I would like to think as soon as you start to recognize, oh, stop questioning yourself, like trust your gut, trust your instincts. I know I've experienced the thing of like, it still crops up, right? So yeah. And like, I was a part of a Me Too moment, that ousted a former boss. And it was insane how it took constant conversations among the group of us that had chosen to come forward about it, where we still, even like after all the evidence was laid out collectively, we were like, yeah, but are we sure you know, even though all of the proof and evidence is there, there's still this sense of like, are we allowed to be this certain about what just happened?
I think I love the phrase you inserted. It's not just, are we allowed to feel this way? Are we allowed to be this certain? Because I think the certainty is what wobbles. It's not, you're not uncertain that you're having these feelings. You're just uncertain about the certainty of what it is that you're feeling.
Yeah. And I think part of that too is we often aren't in a position of being able to control the outcomes if we do come forward, right? So in the case of your essay, right, like you do end up, you know, bringing his behavior before a superior. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that played out?
Yeah, I wrote about it all in the essay, so nothing that isn't on the page, but I, you know, shared that brilliant work with the department chair, as well as, you know, my strange experience with a student in class. It was a woman, which I was grateful for, truly. And she was quite nervous about what may be implied between the lines of this piece, and also what kind of person not only writes this and submits it to their teacher, but reads it aloud in front of their class. And he, which continues to befuddle me still, was really confused about why he was getting in trouble, because he said to her, he changed the color of my hair and the day the class met.
Which is so insane, because he literally alludes to the fact that he clearly was writing about you.
But he made it fiction, right? Isn't that what writers do?
Yeah, you just change hair color. Yeah, pro tip, guys, if you want to write fiction, just change the hair color and you're good.
Tuesday, not Thursday. Done. Yeah, so, I mean, his penalty was being assigned an independent study with a wonderful writer in the department. And he probably had a more, you know, robust and meaningful educational experience by virtue of having a one-on-one tutorial. Right. But, you know, the consequence was being removed from my class, which was the right choice. I mean, I'm not sure what I would have done or what measures are in place, but it does seem like some sort of code of conduct violation. I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway,
no, it doesn't.
There was nothing really beyond like that.
Yeah, it's just like, let's let's move some chairs around, essentially.
That's exactly what it was.
So that people feel more comfortable.
Tuesday, not Thursday.
And this essay also touches on like a really intense story about, you know, your former like childhood or teenagehood gynecologist who like goes on to, you know, be outed by a number of women, dozens, maybe even hundreds.
Up to 96.
Like very abusive. And I think one of the things I was wondering about as you were writing about these topics, you know, in this essay, but also it's something you do throughout the collection, is kind of revisiting experiences from your past. Mm-hmm. And it's clear that, you know, there's this dissonance between how you experienced it at the time, right? And then how you come to understand it later.
Yes.
So yeah, I would love to hear you just talk about that experience of revisiting those past moments and chapters in your lives, in your life. I said in your lives because it feels so accurate to this book. And what that process was like of returning to the past and, you know, finding new meaning and new impact there.
For sure. And I think, you know, that speaks to probably the biggest impetus for me to write the book at all, which was becoming a mother. So I think the opening essay, for example, explores my seeing what I thought to be symptoms of an anxiety disorder in my firstborn son when he was 5. And I had, you know, pretty gnarly anxiety as a child. So it cast a new light on my childhood experience, because suddenly I was witnessing it happen to someone I deeply loved, but also racked with all kinds of feelings about what I may have done to contribute to this, and also what can I do to run interference. Yeah. So I think the revisitation for most of these, I mean, including the one I just read, my sons are in this essay. It's like, how do I raise non-assholes. I think they're in the other room watching. Sorry, guys. Um, but it's how do I, like, what gave that kid the perception that the way he behaved was in any way okay? And how can I prevent my sons, who are, assimilating all kinds of messages beyond the walls of this house or even inside the walls through their iPads and books, whatever, how can I try to ensure that this doesn't happen? So I think I started to see my childhood through, like, how can I, like, what would I say to her, or how can I, like, sort of educate her? I don't know. It did feel a little bit like mothering my younger self a bit.
Yeah, that actually sounds like, it sounds like on the surface, it could be a process that's really difficult and traumatic, but the way you're framing it makes it sound almost cathartic.
I don't know if I'd put it at either pole, because I don't think, I achieved that, which is to say, I can't go back in time. So I think it provided clarity, which I guess is a kind of catharsis. Yeah. In some ways, I gained a better understanding of what it was that I was experiencing. Like when I started to write that anxiety essay and really aggregated all the symptoms, like the bloody noses, the mouth guard I had to wear all through elementary school for clenching my jaw, the deep breaths I couldn't stop taking, and the therapist, and suddenly I was like, oh, that was like, that's kind of a lot of stuff, because I think I thought of them so much in isolation. But as soon as I opened the door to explore it, there was so much there. So I think it did give me a deeper understanding of myself.
This makes me think so much of, just like the obviousness in some ways, like, because both of us do memoir, and I feel like that is the weird thing, is like when you then after the fact start to put the pieces together, you're like, oh my God, it's so obvious, it's so clear. Right. And yet then it's the same thing as sort of constructing that, like looking back on, sexual assault or abuse or just like inappropriate behavior and putting the pieces together later. And even though it seems super clear, there's still that like, but am I getting it all right?
Yeah, I do feel like what you're speaking to me is like what a writer's job is.
Yeah.
Right? It's like doing the excavation, doing the close looking, finding the precise language, not, finding average language. That kind of addresses it. But like, what is it exactly? Like, what am I looking at?
Well, and this makes me want to talk a little bit about the very end of the essay that you read from Hot for Teacher, because I feel like, and I've talked to you about your endings before, and I think this ties in very much to that whole, like the job of a memoirist or writer, like, creating the meaning, finding that container to convey what's happened. It's tricky when it's memoir and it's life experience, because you could tell the same story a lot of different ways, picking and choosing from different elements, and they could all be true, So the closing scene from that essay is your son at, how old is Leo then? Is he like 4 or 5? Yeah, 4. And he's got this pal, you're in Greece for this writing conference, and he's been palling around with this girl, Ivana, and they're like best buds. And then, the last line here, I wrote it down here. Oh yeah. So it's like a photo opportunity, Leo standing next to Ivana, and then everyone starts, you are not, but other people in the group are like encouraging him to kiss Ivana for this photo.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you write, the very last line is, yeah, he does. In it, Leo, so you're referring to the photo, in it, Leo's eyes are shut tight, Ivana is wide open. Mm-hmm. Which I feel like is such an ominous and powerful ending. Yeah, just talk a little bit about that moment for you, both actually being there, but then also your choice to end that essay that way.
Sure. I had a draft of this essay before I had children, which was just the experience of being a teacher in that classroom, because I didn't know how to make sense of it. So I wrote through it. And then it was sitting foul on my computer. Then, the Me Too movement arrived, and I was asked to contribute something to an anthology. And I was like, I already have something that hadn't, I couldn't figure out what to do with it. But then I had become a mother, and had so much more to say about being the mother to boys. So per, our conversation about, how do I be a responsible parent? How do I ensure, I can't ensure, but how do I do my best to raise boys who understand where lines live and which ones not to cross? But I found myself in this situation where, it was this merry moment. We were outside on the patio of a bar, a restaurant/bar, and there was dancing and live music. It's on a Greek island, and it all happened so quickly, right? And the fact that the photo captured their expressions just seemed to me, and she ran off to play. Leo doesn't remember it. I'm not suggesting that either of them are haunted by this experience at all, but I am, in a way, because in some capacity, it captures all that I don't control or can't control, and all the ways in which these forces continue to push on boys and girls.
Yeah.
So I should also say another thread in here is a stalker I had in high school. Oh, the joys of coming of age. And he used to send these photos to my house, which were these like really cheesy black and white stock photos on the cover of these cards. I'm sure you've seen them. It's like just the girl's lips are red and, he's kissing her and they're like 3. I'm sure they would look familiar to you anyway. And that image seemed look too much like it.
Oh, yeah.
So that was also a little wink at the narratives continue.
Yeah. I don't know, Courtney, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but it's making me think of, because again, that seems sort of like, you could tell that story in a way that's just like, oh, it's kind of sweet. There's this student who he's like, he really has a crush on you and he's just a kid and blah, blah, blah. But at one point I also had someone from my past who was stalking me, but and I remember it was scary enough because he was like, oh, I'm going to come up there and visit you kind of thing. He lived out of state. And so my mom was like, you should at least report it to the police just so it's like, there's a record of it. But the conversation I then had to have with the cops, which of course was the most pointless conversation, they did not care at all, but I felt so absurd, right? I already felt absurd making the call, but then they were like, okay.
Are we okay being certain about this? I mean,
right.
Is it the same thing?
But literally they were like, so he's threatened you? I was like, yeah. It's like, well, what did he threaten to do? He's like, I was like,
visit me,
come to New York and marry me, like the threat to marry someone, it's like, yeah, that doesn't sound scary and violent, but it's like, but they have a completely different narrative that I want nothing to do with. And they, anyways, it's just so fascinating, like the shades of what we're used to identifying as like assault or abuse or whatever else, but then all these different shades of like these situations that you're thrust in that you don't know how to navigate them, and we don't really have societal structure or tools to help us.
I think those are the ones I'm most interested in part because the most extreme examples are the ones like the Harvey Weinstein clear-cut cases,
right,
are the ones that get all the attention. But clearly there's so many stones that have paved a path to get there.
Sure.
So it does feel like, a responsible thing to do is back way up.
Right. And right. And before we get, yes. And before we get to the very intense victimizer framework, to be able to say like, okay, can we just talk about behaviors here?
Period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so one of the questions that I have is just because I know that as you were putting together this book, there was for a brief period of time this sort of anxiety on brand about like whether there was enough of a through line in these essays to have them be a cohesive collection, which like now of course seems comical because it's like, duh, all these essays absolutely belong together. But talk to me a little bit about that process. I mean, I guess it's a little bit more of like a writerly question, but I think it might be interesting for people. Like, how did that moment for you happen? Was it kind of like an aha moment of after sitting long enough with those essays? Was it having people read them and kind of be like, hey, you know what? These are all about anxiety or questions about the past or whatever it may be.
It's so funny because I was like trying to stick a square peg in a round hole or any other attendant cliches. I kept trying to impose on them the thread that bound them. And I was doing this in concert with my agent. It was anxiety. For a little while, it was also this idea of like lives I'll never live. There's a piece about ghostwriting for a Syrian refugee, whose mind and body I had to inhabit to write his book. There's one about my mother's past life as a rock star. Anyway, there are various ways in which I felt like, there's the longest one, Holy Body, is about a friend of mine who served as a gestational surrogate for a couple she didn't know. And I was fascinated, and I'm still fascinated by this extreme act of generosity that I feel incapable of performing. And like, why will she do that? And why won't I do that? And anyway, these lives, other lives that I won't live. So I think, to my great relief, but it took a little while, there are several themes, I think, that interweave, but ultimately, so obviously, the book was born out of my becoming a mother. There's not a single essay in here that I didn't write like immediately after, or in the few years, sleepless years, it's all one long year, after becoming a parent, because there were all these experiences happening per our conversation a few minutes ago that were kind of recast for me, so that I could see them through this lens and either understand them with more clarity or try to educate myself about how to be a parent now.
Yeah.
So it just, like, as soon as I sort of owned that, it was like, oh, duh.
Why do you think there was some resistance to owning that?
Yeah.
Or just, yeah.
I do.
Was it because you didn't want that identity of motherhood to be so predominant? Or
I think it wasn't even conscious, but I have to believe there was some resistance. Like, I didn't want to write a mom book. So snobby. I mean,
it's not snobby. I think it's because it becomes a silo that we're often, as female writers, put in, like, I think that is a legitimate, like, concern or fear or resistance, right? Is like,
it was more fear that it would be lumped with other kinds of books to which I didn't see my book relating. But ultimately it's kind of a marketing tool anyway, right? These are yes and no. I think, I don't know what else to say except for that. I think I thought it maybe did a disservice to the many layers I tried to work in here. Though I will say there are plenty of writers I love who treat motherhood with, intelligence and nuance. So I'm a little mystified by my reluctance, but I also own it.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's very clear that this book is engaging with motherhood, but also broadly, like, self and other. Like, that theme was just so dominant throughout. And I think, I think so I'm trying to decide what to dig into next, because there are so many delicious things. But I will say, okay, so I want to talk about Holy Body. Okay. Just because I feel like it captures this part of your personality that we see on the page so much, which is just this almost like compulsive curiosity. Yes. Like this, like, need to know that takes like the kind of curiosity that's at the core of all of us, but you often are like, let's take it one step further. So with Holy Body, it's like a camp, someone you went to camp with, and like you guys looked a lot alike all growing up. And literally it just starts with this, like the essay would not have existed if you had just seen her post about being a gestational surrogate on Facebook and stopped at liking it. Right. Mm-hmm. So I just want to talk a little bit about that space between just being like and sitting there with your own thoughts, and what spurred you to actually be like, no, I need to know more.
Oh my gosh, how much time you got? Okay, so this is, as you said, a camp friend who, we looked alike. This was a Jewish summer sleepaway camp that I attended for 7 consecutive summers. And she went on to become kind of an observant Jew. I am traditionally Jewish. I'm married to a non-Jew, which I write about in the book. And, our lives really diverged. Again, other lives, right? And she wound up professionally, what she does for a living is so fascinating to me too. she became the executive director of a mikveh center in Massachusetts. So a mikveh is a ritual bathhouse where Jews immerse to acknowledge some sort of transitional moment. Historically, it had only been like the end stop en route to conversion, like Jews someone who was converting. This is like, you know, the holy water. You dip, you emerge, you're a Jew. Also a place for ultra-Orthodox Jews to immerse every month so that they could purify themselves for their husbands so they could procreate. That's how I only ever heard of or understood a mikveh. But there was this news, and this is, I know, there's this essay, so much in it, but this mikveh center, which is called Mayim Chaim, which translates to holy water, was created with a really progressive mission, which was for Jews of all stripes to acknowledge any kind of moment of meaning, whether it's celebrating a birthday, whether it's announcing yourself as transgender, whether it's having an abortion, like very progressive and lovely. This is the center that she oversees. And while she was there, there were a lot of women coming through to immerse over fertility issues, whether they had, had a miscarriage or were unable to conceive. And she had 3 small children, and thought, surely there's something I could do, which is not a thought I would ever have. And she said, my uterus is collecting dust. This is what she said to me. So she wanted to look to see how she could put it to use, and looked into becoming a gestational surrogate. It wasn't for like monetary reasons. It wasn't because her sister, she doesn't even have a sister, couldn't conceive. She consulted with a rabbi who said, you need to carry a child for a Jewish couple, so the child will be raised Jewish. A couple in the UK had consulted their rabbi who said, you need to have a Jewish surrogate because for your baby to be a Jew, it has to be cooked in a Jewish body. I know it's a bad word to use, sorry. And so there was this, union between them. And she was keeping a blog about it. And I was just ravenously consuming it, but like just stunned that she would think to make this choice, that she then made this choice, that she went through with it, all that it required of her body in her marriage as a mother. So I sent her an email and asked if I could come and visit I wanted to write about it.
Just hearing you recount it, even it's like your astonishment at her choice to do this is so palpable. And I think maybe one of my questions, because this sort of self and other thing that drives so many of your essays, including, as you were talking about, the Aleppo essay, where you're recalling, ghostwriting from the point of view of a Syrian Jew who fled, but like has all these memories of Aleppo. And then you're juxtaposing that with then seeing, Syrian refugees and children dying, in contemporary times. And that's like my question, I guess, is like that curiosity that drives you, where you're like, I want to understand. And it's essentially like, what is the difference between me and this other person? Do you get satisfaction? Like by the end of, there's so much that we learn as that process of exploration unfolds. But I wonder for you personally, after having written this, is that curiosity and that deep drive to understand, why am I this way and why are you that way?
Yes.
Is it sated?
It was sated in terms of understanding her. I think I'll always be a mystery to myself, but I think I gained a lot of clarity into why she made this choice, and also how it was a choice very specific to being a gestational surrogate. She's not interested in donating a kidney or other ways in which she can, do extreme things with her body to save lives. So I think I asked her a lot of questions. I was interested in its religious roots and her upbringing, in her line of work, sort of what built her own sort of ethical sphere, and her motivations. And it was sated. I really feel like, having not, spent a few days with her, like poking with questions more, because I think it's not there's no singular answer. It's like, oh, I did this because I saw an ad on YouTube, on the internet. It was very complicated. And she read the essay And like the essay, so I feel also like the way I understood it did justice to her own understanding of why she did it.
Right. I am mindful of time, and I know, let's see, it's like 7:45, and I definitely want to ask you about Boy in Blue. So this is the essay that almost didn't make it into the book. So yes. Talk a little bit about that essay and why it almost didn't make it into the book.
Okay, so this is arguably the most important essay to me, in part because it was the hardest one. It got rewritten many, many times. I read many, many books, which you would never know from reading this essay because hardly any of that made it in. But it's the essay about my young son's cop obsession. We live in Brooklyn, next door to a police precinct station. We every day walk to and from, across the station and see folks being pulled out of the back of cars across our path into the station. We see officers doing all kinds of things. I live on a block that was cordoned off this summer, so protesters couldn't express their rightful outrage in front of the station so that it was protected. And we simultaneously saw officers in combat/riot gear with military grade weapons marching past our stoop many evenings in a row. So my son is a white boy who, at the time he was 4, but he's 6 and still loves it, dressed head to toe in a police outfit that I, got for him after he begged for it. I also bought him a shark costume and a doctor's, outfit, a squid hat, the whole range.
Which you try to lure him with. It's like, how about the squid today?
Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with let's be a superhero? But the allure of dressing like an officer, and I partly attribute it to our geography, but again, who knows? I have friends whose kids grow up in the country without this proximity, and their kids are still attracted to this role. So I reckoned on the page in this essay with how to be a responsible parent of a white boy who likes to march all around the neighborhood and to the supermarket and around Prospect Park dressed as a cop in the heat of the Black Lives Matter movement. And how can his small, still developing brain compute all of my feelings about this? It can't, is the short answer. But how can I interact with him in ways that I will plant the proper seeds so that he will, over time, understand why mommy won't let him carry a gun, and why mommy wishes he would wear a squid hat.
Well, and in this essay, I mean, because I had read earlier versions of it, and I actually hadn't read the published version yet, so that was exciting. But yeah,
awaiting your thoughts. Yes.
Well, it becomes, and just by you saying, like, I was reading so much, like, this essay, as with all of these essays, they feel like anytime it's an inquiry into like a friend or your child or something else, it's always a reckoning with yourself, right? And so what's interesting about this essay is that it's like, as you're reckoning with how to discuss ideas and concepts of white privilege with your own son, you're also reckoning with your own relationship to white privilege.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's like, what is the theme that binds this book? It's like responsible motherhood. So I feel like, for me, part of that job, that part of that responsibility is like really looking closely at myself. It's like, I can't just like put on a hat and be this it's like, what are my deeply held beliefs, misconceptions, experiences, and how are they informing what I may or may not say?
Right. Well, and so one of the new components of this essay that I hadn't seen yet that you added in is that you actually tell Leo that you yourself were arrested. So talk to me about that decision to tell him and his reaction, which is both comical, but I'm also curious about the broader, like whether he tells a lot of people about that.
He sure does. And I also want to just make sure that your earlier question about how it almost didn't make it in, I want to make sure I answer that. I think the stakes are very high for writing about white privilege as a white person, and they should be.
Yeah.
And there are so many ways to be an accidental asshole, and I really didn't want to be one. so this essay just kept mutating, and I had many really generous readers and did a lot of deep thinking. It had like a several year long gestation before I felt like, and got, you know, the green light from readers whose vantage points I very much trust and would tell me all the things. But to your question, yes. So when I was 16 years old, shoplifted like an idiot, but grabbed an armload of clothes and thought I would be hidden in plain sight because I'm white, and walked out the front door of an Esprit outlet thinking that, why would anyone think I'm stealing? I'm like this cute, you know, 16-year-old. And of course I got caught, and turned out I had committed felony retail theft, which was based on the value of the merchandise. And I sobbed and sobbed when I was pulled over on the side of the highway and arrested to a line of rubbernecking cars on the hood of the police car, and, you know, mugshot and fingerprinted. But because the corporal in his wide-brimmed hat told me he could tell I came from a good family, I was recommended to the DA for a diversion program, a first-time offenders program, which required me to pay a bunch of fines, which we could afford, and do a bunch of volunteer work, which made it onto my college application. So when my son asked if I'd ever been arrested, I told him yes, which, you know, he's 4. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But he wanted to know what I did. I said I didn't want to spend my babysitting money. I made a bad mistake. He wanted to know if I went to jail, which I did not. And then he was so like sort of aroused by this information that everyone who came through the door for the next several weeks heard the story. The plumber, my colleagues, someone he had a play date with, their mother. He was like, my mom was arrested. Right after she was like, I'm going to go run some errands. I'll be right back. You know, I was like, oh, no worries. We're all good here. So, you know, I don't know how he metabolizes this. I don't know whether the dramatic play with which I try to engage him with to try to sort of complicate his understanding of good guys and bad guys has any effect. I am just trying to figure it out as I go.
Yeah, and the ending, again, it's like the very characteristic Zoffness ending. It's really beautiful, but really ambiguous and full of a lot of feelings. Wait, hold on. I know I have it here. Oh, here we go. We've yet to correct him. In Leo's linguistic reality, freedom rules. Nobody suffers. Everyone is equal. Everyone is blameless. So you're kind of referring to the fact that, like, you've had these conversations, but he's still kind of like with his Legos, you know, will have like one character arresting the other one, you know. So in this reality that you've captured of what you think where his mind is at, like, where does that leave you? What feelings are wrapped up in that closing for you?
You know, an idealism.
Yeah.
You know, he says, you're unarrested. That's his mutation of under arrest. He fuses the words, which is much more beautiful than you're arrested.
Yeah.
And I just loved his misunderstanding, which I didn't correct, in the hopes that it may suggest, you know, better things for his own, you know, kind of play, but also his future. Yeah. Even though last weekend we may or may not have gone back to the precinct for a visit.
Yeah.
I know it's 7:55. I feel like we could talk for hours.
Yeah, no, this is really wonderful. I did want to say, we're getting, you know, a lot of like loving comments on the Facebook Live stream. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Laura and Jane and Rico. If anyone does have any questions in the next several minutes, you know, throw them up there. I'll try to relay them in time. I did want to bring us back to something that kind of started the conversation, which is about fiction. Yeah. And particularly fiction and memoir and or nonfiction essays, you know, this style, and I also just want to connect it to your very well picked epigraph by Ocean Vuong, who does I think has self-identified as writing poetry, but also his novel in this memoir, like almost a memoir like way. And I know it is not a memoir, his novel, but I think there's this line that is, I think, a really, really beautiful line between the two. And I know that was brought up at the very beginning, because so I just want to bring us back to that. If we want to comment on that, and then we have several more minutes, so don't feel rushed.
Okay. You want to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, I will just say that is so evident throughout your essays, right? The scene work, the characters, there's so many.
Yours too.
Yeah, it was funny. Actually, one of the questions that occurred to me was that, like, in as much as when you were talking about like that a little bit of resistance around like sort of the mother memoir, I got distracted, but I was about to follow that up with like, well, how does it feel to be a nonfiction writer rather than a fiction writer for your debut book, right? Obviously you still do both, but I know that was a really complicated thing for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe that I would love to hear your thoughts on that, like how having, like, did you kind of make peace with it along the way, and was it because there was so many sort of fictional, like, stylistic elements that are happening in your book? Yeah.
I've been asked a couple of times, like, what are the different ways I approach writing fiction versus nonfiction? And the answer is there's not a difference for me. And I think one of the beauties of creative nonfiction, which is where this book lives, is there's so much possibility that I'm not actually limited to just like my lived experience. I think your limit, it's what I imagine. And that there's a whole spectrum of ways you can play with, like, what you forecast, what you imagine, what that is not strict to, so the confines of one's life, but also because we were trained as fiction writers, that is how I think about story in terms of scene and in terms of these precise details, which is, a quality I love in Ocean Vuong's work too. And so I think the impulses may differ a little bit. In nonfiction, it's to really gain clarity about something real, whereas fiction, it's like, that's a weird idea, let's chase that and make up stuff around it. But I think the construction, the architecture feels very similar to me.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking of it, I feel like there's some stylistic overlap in terms of how we write nonfiction, because it's very, like, there's scenes and they might seem dissonant at first, but then they sort of build together, and then hopefully, if they're working well, like, lead the reader somewhere where they're actually kind of along for the ride. They're doing some of the work. So there's a really beautiful thing that happens throughout your essays where, I feel like a lot of times when people hear the word memoir, they're like, oh boy, I'm about to get all the personal stuff, all the personal details, the whole story from, like, the soup to nuts. But with, like, the writing that you do is so finely crafted, and it is so well structured that there's a very, what's the right way to put it? Very considered disclosure, like, throughout. And yeah, and I think that really adds to the emotional strength of it, is that you're allowing space for the reader to think their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, even as you and the other characters you're writing about are very, very present, and their emotional lives are still very present on the page.
Yes. And I appreciate so much that you call it considered disclosure, because I've had folks who think this is an autobiography, and there is so much of my own, like, dark personal experience that does not have any home in this book. It is like such a little sliver of my life. And I did have to make a lot of decisions about the people I was including and the experiences I felt comfortable sharing, all of that. So it was considered, like, note by note.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm happy to keep asking you questions, but I don't want to, if there are folks who have questions, yeah, I don't know.
We're getting a lot, a lot of nice attention on Facebook, and we're just about pretty much out of time. And okay. But you guys also, do feel like we keep talking about this book, because it's really dense in this, like, really beautiful way, and it's really, I think jumping in with the fiction, the construction of fiction too. I think that the way you construct the narrative, both like is a way in which fiction does it very well. The jumping back and forth, it mimics both like the topic itself, the anxiety around what's you're talking about is like also shape, the way you shape your paragraphs. It's a really great book, and I'm glad we got to. I'm also really glad I got to listen to both of you talk about it, because it's been very nice. But
appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I think we could wrap up here if that's okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I did want to say if I think we did actually. Let's see if we got a question here. Okay, how about you? One more question. Is that okay? I don't want to end it. I want rather have someone else in this. So one sec. Let me read this. It's from Jane. I struggled with trying to work through moments in my life somewhat in real time via my writing. I wonder how you feel about the immediacy of experience versus hindsight in your work.
Can you read the first part of it again?
Yeah. I struggle with trying to work through moments in my life somewhat in real time.
Yeah.
I struggle to work through moments in my life somewhat in real time via my writing and allowing them to gestate before getting near them. I wonder how you feel about the immediacy of experience versus hindsight in your work.
Yes. So I think, there's no way to do this. There's no single way to do this. I think I often, as with, say my son's playing cop, would immediately write down things he did because I wouldn't want to forget them. I don't trust my memory to recall things accurately, but I was struck sometimes by things he'd say or by observations he'd make or questions he would ask. It did take time for me to come to any kind of understanding around them and also figure out how they all stitch together. So I think there is value absolutely in writing stuff down immediately. But I also think the art of writing is, taking some time to ensure that the lens you're training on it is the one you mean, the one you want, the one that's going to work the best. Likewise, structurally, I think there's a lot of trial and error there, I find, to ensure that the right details are included and the right ones are excluded, and the order seems most poignant, if that makes sense. Onnesha, does that make sense to you?
That makes total sense. Yeah. And I was just going to say the same rules for writing as for like being a human in the world, right? Like anytime you notice that you're having a really strong feeling or reaction to something,
don't trust it. No, I'm just
press it down, cram it down as far as it can go. No, it's like, that's something to be paid attention to. It's not something to then throw yourself, full tilt into necessarily, but it's something to note. It's really important information, but then of course it takes time to understand what that information is for. And even more time to understand how to act on that information in a way that ensures you have integrity and are making the best choices for yourself and for those around you.
Mm-hmm. And for the writing itself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So well said. Thank you. Thank you both. This has really been a wonderful evening. I did want to say we do have books, Spilt Milk at the store. You can order it online on our websites, www.lostcitybookstore.com. You can call us, you can email us, you could Instagram message us, whatever, and we'll get the book for you. So it should be pretty easy. Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you so much, Onnesha. I really appreciate your time. Great.
You, Adam, Katie.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a great evening.
You too. Take care.